This is the new Mercedes-AMG C63S, and if you've been anywhere near social media in the last few weeks, you'll know that this car no longer has a twin-turbo V8. In fact, it's a turbocharged four-cylinder. But if you listen to the posts, it gets even worse because this car also has an electric motor on the rear axle. Yeah, it's a hybrid C63. And straight away, we've opened the door to a very small room and pushed inside a very large elephant. You can hear the gnashing of the teeth from 4 city blocks among the C63 faithful. It can't possibly be a real C63, they say, with a turbocharged four-cylinder hybrid driveline. But are they right? I mean, this car has the potential to be a cop-out and a compromise. But then you drive it.
But before we get to that, let's look at what you get and what it costs. The C63 SE Performance costs $187,900. But you're not just buying the AMG driveline. In fact, this thing is loaded with Napa leather, a panoramic sunroof, huge display screens, full connectivity, heated and powered front seats, augmented reality sat-nav, 20-inch alloys, and selectable drive modes. There's also, in true Mercedes fashion, a stack of optional packages to add carbon fibre inside, outside and everywhere else, as well as a sports seat option. Check the written review at carsguide.com.au for the full story. The big design change, of course, is the philosophical one, from a hot rod to a modern performance car, courtesy of that techie hybrid driveline. Beyond that, though, the whole C63 demeanour has been toned down to make the car a little less shouty. The exterior add-ons include a subtle bonnet scoop and big wheels and tyres, but there's also an extra 10mm in the wheelbase and a wider track. The interior works really well for something with as much going on as this thing has. Yes, the steering wheel now has 4 horizontal bars to accommodate the huge number of functions, but the twin screens are large, easy to use, and the head-up display is as good as any out there. The front seats are hugely supportive without feeling too hard, and the interior space overall reflects the fact that the C-Class is now easily as big as an E-Class of just a few years ago. The packaging downside to the hybrid layout is that the batteries and management systems have to live somewhere. In this case, that somewhere is under the boot floor, reducing boot space by about a third over any other C-Class sedan.
Now, before we go for a drive, let me fill you in on some of the technical bits of this because it is a pretty tech-heavy car. That's the turbocharger. It's driven by the exhaust gas and also an electric motor. That's the reduced lag. The engine's 2 litres, it makes 350 kilowatts of power, and when the electric motor on the back axle is in full swing, there's another 150, so it's 500 kilowatts of power. It's also 1,020 Newton meters. That's according to the spec sheet, but that's a little bit misleading because the electric engine's torque is measured after it's been through the gearbox and multiplied. So in a roundabout way, it's probably not 1,020, but it's certainly still 700 or 800 at least. That gives this car much greater fuel economy than before with all the performance, or that's the theory. But I guess what we need to do is check it out, and we also need to see what this sounds like because, let's face it, that soundtrack was as much a part of the old C63 as anything else about the car. Aside from the really high-tech driveline, if you believe the marketing bump, it's F1 inspired, fair enough. This car is also really high-tech in other ways too. It's got adjustable dampers, the different AMG drive modes, Comfort, Sport, Sport Plus. It's got the works. There really is a lot going on under the waterline that you don't actually feel. And the other thing that you don't feel is the weight. It's 2.1 tons, remember? So it's a big lump of a thing, but it carries that weight very well, possibly because there's so much balance in the platform. It's got a 50-50 weight distribution, which surely helps, and big tyres and big brakes. Now, what everyone wants to know, of course, is what this thing sounds like. Well, it sounds like a 4-cylinder because that's what it is. And AMG have resisted the urge to give it a V8 soundtrack. They've said all along, if it doesn't have a V8, it won't sound like one, and it doesn't. The soundtrack is augmented a little bit through the speakers, and there's speakers under the car so that people on the outside can hear what's going on. But basically, it feels like a really refined, really smooth, sophisticated, and very powerful 4-cylinder. Does it feel like 500 kilowatts and 1,020 Newton meters? To be honest, it doesn't. And again, that may be a function of the mass of the thing, but it certainly gets out of Dodge in a heck of a hurry. And I have no trouble believing that it will get from 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in under 4 seconds. In fact, comfortably under 4 seconds. 3.4 is the official claim. Now, the other thing about this car, this is, and I say this without fear of contradiction, this is the first C63 that I've ever driven that I could live with the ride quality on a day-to-day basis. It rides so much nicer than previous cars to bear the C63 badge. It is not funny. Even on Sport, or even Sport Plus, the suspension is compliant enough that you can absolutely roll over the worst of the potholes and imperfections, and it doesn't throw the car offline. More than that, it doesn't throw the passengers in the air like the old car used to. So that's a big step forward. I think this car also steers beautifully. The rear wheel steering obviously kicks in at lower speeds to help guide the car in a tighter circle. At high speeds, the rear wheels steer in sympathy with the front wheels so that it maintains stability on high speed turns. But it works so beautifully. The feedback through this wheel is really, really up there with the best of them. I think it's fantastic. The weight's great. Everything about the steering, I'm a big fan of. Now, while that electric turbocharger means no lag, or actually almost no lag, you can still actually feel a little bit. I think the limiting factor in the way this car gets up and goes is the 9-speed gearbox, which is attached to the petrol 2-litre engine. Frankly, it has trouble keeping up, shifting down fast enough to keep up with the motors. And the other thing about it is that when you have accelerated and you back off, I find the gearbox is a little bit too keen or too eager to hang on to low gears. It sort of leaves you hanging in the seatbelt almost when you back off, and it could afford to be calibrated a little bit so that it shifts up faster. I think that'd make it a nicer car, certainly in comfort setting. In the sports setting, you kind of expect it to hang onto the gears, but in comfort, it could afford to be a little bit more relaxed, a bit chilled. Economy is much better than the previous V8. The V8 had an official combined figure of 10.3 litres per 100. This car's 6.1. Still not stellar for a hybrid, but pretty damn good for something with this sort of performance.
Okay, so 6.1 litres per 100 kilometres is pretty amazing for a car that can get from 0 to 100 in about 3.5 seconds. But what about charging the battery? Well, it's a small 6.1 kilowatt hour battery, and it'll go from fully discharged to fully charged in under 2 hours. From there, you have about a 15 kilometre all EV driving range if you don't want to wake the neighbours. If you can get near the claimed 6.1 litres per 100 kilometre mark, the 60 litre tank will give you almost 1,000 kilometres between fill-ups. But if you start using that turbo boost, consumption will inevitably rise. That's life. There's every kind of driver aid you can think of here, and it all seems to work well. You get a 360-degree camera and 8 airbags, including a driver's knee bag and a centre airbag, which aims to prevent head clashes in the case of a side impact. While the C-Class has been crash tested in Europe, the C63 hasn't been tested here, and Mercedes has no plans to throw one at the wall locally. Service intervals are every 12 months or 20,000 kilometres. The factory warranty is 5 years, unlimited kilometres, but Mercedes also covers the hybrid battery for 6 years or 100,000 kilometres, whichever comes first. There's also fixed price servicing at just over $7,000 for the first 5 years.
I'm really struggling to remember another car that threw up so many philosophical questions before I'd ever driven it. But the reality is AMG has done a great job, yet again, of turning a C-Class sedan into a real high-performance weapon. That leaves the original C63 owners and those who worship at the altar of the twin-turbo V8. Basically, that'll be the thing for Mercedes to do, is to drag their hearts and minds into the new millennium. And if they can do that, their wallets should follow, because believe me, this is an absolute sweetheart of a car. Would I like it better with a V8 engine and 400 or 500 kilos less? Yeah, of course I would. But it's a moot point, because that's not where the world is at the moment. This is the future, and if that's the case, the future looks pretty bright.